Your phone shows the time down to the second, but 2,000 years ago, Romans used a shadow cast by the sun. How could a simple stone dial possibly keep an empire on schedule? The true precision they achieved will genuinely surprise you. By the end of this, you will understand the hidden genius behind ancient timekeeping. We will uncover how they engineered for perfect accuracy and explore the one critical flaw that even their best minds could not solve. What does a civilization's relationship with time tell you about its ultimate ambitions? A stark, vertical spike stood at the center of a stone disk. This was the gnomon, the very heart of the Roman sundial, a silent finger whose moving shadow painted the time for all to see. But this pointer was useless alone. Its stage was the dial face, a meticulously carved surface of concentric circles and radiating lines. These lines were not mere decoration. They were a frozen map of the sun's daily journey, each one marking a different hour of the Roman day. The entire device, often a massive block of imported marble or cast bronze, was a permanent fixture in public life. You would find these timekeepers anchored in the bustling forum, where merchants timed their deals and politicians kept their appointments, or gracing the sunlit courtyards of wealthy villas, organizing the private rhythms of a powerful family. The most common design was the hemispherium, a hollowed-out bowl shaped like half of a sphere. Imagine cupping your hands together, with the gnomon rising from the center of the palm. The sun's shadow would sweep across the inner curved surface, its tip touching the hour lines engraved there. Another popular style was the hemicyclium, a simpler, flatter version that looked like a half-circle cut from a block of stone. While less complex to build, it was just as effective for its purpose. The craftsmanship involved was extraordinary. Sculptors did not just carve random lines, they calculated the precise angles for a specific location, often etching the name of the local magistrate who commissioned it right into the stone. This was not a portable gadget. It was public infrastructure, a grand and beautiful monument that turned the abstract concept of time into something solid, visible, and shared by an entire community. That silent finger of stone pointed not to chaos, but to a hidden cosmic order. The Romans did not merely carve lines onto a dial, they etched a perfect model of the heavens onto earth. This required a profound understanding of how the sun appeared to move through our sky. Think of the sky as a vast, inverted bowl, with the earth fixed at its center. The sun travels along a specific highway across this dome, a path called the ecliptic. But for telling time, the most important reference line was the celestial equator. Imagine taking our planet's own equator and projecting it outward, painting a giant circle onto that celestial dome directly above us. This invisible line in the sky was the master key. A sundial's gnomon had to be perfectly aligned with the Earth's axis, pointing directly toward the celestial North Pole. When set correctly, its shadow would move at a constant, predictable speed throughout the day, a perfect clock hand driven by the rotation of the planet itself. But here is the catch. The pattern of those moving shadows is different for every single city on Earth. The precise angle of the sun's path, how high it climbs in the summer or how low it hugs the horizon in the winter, is determined by one thing alone: your latitude. The engineers in Rome could not simply copy a sundial design from Alexandria or Carthage and expect it to work. They had to calculate the hour lines specifically for the latitude of Rome, which is approximately 42 degrees north. This meant the angle of the gnomon, the spacing of the hour lines, and even the curve of the summer and winter arcs on the dial face were all custom calculated for that one location. A sundial built for Rome would tell the time perfectly in Rome, but its shadow would fall on the wrong line just a few dozen miles away, growing progressively more inaccurate with distance. This was not a flaw, it was a feature of their genius, a testament to their grasp of a spherical world long before global navigation was common. They were not just marking time, they were anchoring their city to the cosmos. So how did they translate this complex celestial geometry into solid, unyielding stone? This geographical dependency made the Roman sundial a profoundly local instrument. A beautifully calibrated timepiece in the Forum of Rome would become a useless slab of marble if you tried to use it in Londinium or Alexandria. The farther you traveled from the city for which it was designed, the more its shadow would lie. At high noon in Rome, the shadow might point directly to the 12th hour line, but that same sun, viewed from a different latitude, would cast a shadow that fell minutes, or even a full hour, away from the correct mark. This was the sundial's great limitation. It was chained to its birthplace. So how did a sprawling empire, with legions marching across 3 continents and merchants sailing distant seas, manage the time? They could not haul multi-ton marble dials with them. The solution was a leap in portable engineering, the traveling sundial. Imagine a small, intricate device made of bronze, perhaps small enough to fit in a soldier's pack or a merchant's chest. Unlike the fixed public dials, these were adjustable. A key feature was a removable gnomon. The user could set the angle of this central pin to match the latitude of their current location. The dial face itself might be a complex series of rotating rings, or have multiple sets of hour lines for different regions. Using one required knowledge and skill. A centurion on campaign in Germania would first need to know, at least roughly, his current latitude. He would then adjust the gnomon to the correct angle, orient the dial to face true north, and only then could he read the local time. This process reveals a hidden layer of Roman sophistication, their reliance on pre-modern cartography and astronomy. They used maps and star charts that, while not perfectly accurate by our standards, provided the essential geographical data needed to make these portable clocks function. It was a fragile system, a dance between human knowledge and celestial mechanics, where a simple mistake in alignment could throw an entire day's schedule into chaos. Yet even a perfectly calibrated sundial faced a far greater challenge than geography, a problem written in the very movement of the sun itself. The Romans divided their daytime into 12 equal parts, but these were not the fixed 60-minute hours we know today. For them, an hour was simply 1/12 of the time between sunrise and sunset. This simple definition created a world of constant, rhythmic change. In the height of a Roman summer, the sun was in the sky for nearly 15 of our modern hours. Each of those 12 Roman daylight hours would therefore stretch to about 75 minutes. But in the deep of winter, when daylight might last only 9 hours, each Roman hour would shrink to a mere 45 minutes. The sundial's shadow did not mark a uniform passage of time. It traced the elastic, breathing rhythm of the day itself. This system of unequal hours meant that the very meaning of an hour was in constant flux. A meeting set for the 5th hour in July would occur far later in the day than a meeting set for the 5th hour in January. The entire society operated on this flexible clock. Think of the Forum at noon in summer. The bustling activity stretched over a long, bright afternoon. Now picture that same Forum at noon in winter, the business day compressed into a few short hours of gray light, with each hour feeling rushed and fleeting. This required a profound adaptability from everyone, from the senator scheduling debates to the baker timing his batches of bread. Their lives were not ruled by a rigid, ticking metronome, but by the expansive and contracting heartbeat of the sun. So how did they coordinate anything across such a fluid timescale? And what happened when the sun was not there to guide them at all? A cloudy day could plunge the entire city into a state of temporal confusion. When the sun vanished behind a blanket of gray, the elegant stone dials in the Forum fell silent, their shadowy clock hand simply disappearing. The intricate system of unequal hours, so perfectly tuned to the sun's rhythm, ground to a halt. So how did a civilization that so meticulously mapped the heavens cope when the sky went blank? They turned to a different element, water. In courts and wealthy homes, the clepsydra or water clock took over. This was not a complex machine, but a simple, brilliant device. Imagine a ceramic pot with a small hole drilled near its base, filled to a marked line with water. As the water steadily dripped out, a falling level inside the pot, or a rising level in a second receiving vessel, would indicate the passage of time. A floating pointer might even track the hours against a vertical scale. These clocks were immune to clouds and worked deep into the night, but they had their own frustrations. Water flows differently depending on its temperature and water pressure. A clepsydra on a cold morning would run slower than one on a warm afternoon, gradually drifting out of sync with the sun. For even more personal use, people relied on candle clocks. A candle of known composition and thickness would be marked with rings. Each band represented the time it took to burn down to that point. You could light a candle at dusk and have a rough idea of the hour throughout the night, watching the wax slowly surrender to the flame. Yet these backup systems were imperfect, creating a world where punctuality was a fragile concept. We have records of legal proceedings where a speaker would complain that his opponent was using up all the water, or rather, all the time allotted for the case. An overcast day could mean a missed meeting, a delayed market, or a tardy legionary patrol. Important events, from Senate sessions to major religious ceremonies, were scheduled with one eye on the calendar and the other on the likely weather, a gamble against the moods of the sky. This fundamental uncertainty reveals a society living in a delicate balance between human order and natural chaos, forever at the mercy of a passing cloud. The stone and bronze that gave these dials their form were as vital as the geometry they displayed. Roman engineers selected materials not just for beauty, but for permanence and precision. In the public forum, you would find monumental dials carved from a single, massive block of imported marble or gleaming white limestone. These stones were chosen for their fine grain, which allowed artisans to carve the delicate hour lines and numerals with astonishing clarity, ensuring the shadow's edge would be sharp against the markings. For the most prestigious commissions, the dial face might be made of exotic purple porphyry, a stone quarried from a single source in the Egyptian desert, its imperial color signaling the power of the timepiece and its patron. But marble was not the only medium. Bronze was the choice for portable sundials and many public monuments, prized for its strength and the fine detail achievable in casting. A bronze dial could be engineered with rotating rings and adjustable gnomons, its surface engraved with a spiderweb of lines for different months and latitudes. The craftsmanship involved was extraordinary. We know from surviving examples and tool marks left on unfinished pieces that artisans used bronze chisels, drills, and abrasive sands to slowly grind the stone to a perfect, smooth curve. The laying out of the hour lines was a task for a master geometer, not a simple stone carver. Using compasses, rulers, and complex mathematical tables, They would first inscribe the design in ink or chalk before committing it permanently to the stone with a chisel and mallet. Any error in this process was catastrophic, a flaw frozen for centuries. One famous example, the Solarium Augusti, was a giant sundial that used an Egyptian obelisk as its gnomon, its dial face covering an entire plaza. The scale was immense, but the required precision was microscopic. The numerals themselves, often Roman numerals deeply cut into the stone, were not just functional, they were works of art, their elegant serifs and flowing curves demonstrating that this was a functional artwork, a meeting point of science, civic duty, and sublime aesthetics. These were not mere timekeeping devices. They were permanent declarations of a civilization's ability to harmonize with the cosmos, carved in materials meant to outlast empires. Among these masterpieces of stone and bronze, a few stood as legends in their own time. The Solarium Augusti, or the Sundial of Augustus, was not merely a timepiece, it was a colossal declaration of imperial power. Erected in the Campus Martius around 10 BC, its gnomon was a towering red granite obelisk, stolen from Egypt and hauled across the sea. This single stone needle, over 100 feet tall, cast a shadow across a vast paved plaza that served as the dial face. The entire ground was inlaid with a grid of bronze lines, marking not only the hours but also the days of the year and the signs of the zodiac. On the emperor's birthday, the shadow would fall perfectly upon a specific altar, a celestial alignment engineered to link his rule directly with the cosmos. It was more than a clock. It was a political statement in stone, telling the people that their emperor could command the sun itself. Far to the east, in the intellectual heart of Athens, another marvel demonstrated Rome's reach. The Horologium of Andronicus, also known as the Tower of the Winds, was an octagonal marble tower built in the 1st century BC. It was a complete timekeeping and weather station, crowned with a weather vane and featuring no fewer than 8 sundials on its exterior walls, each one facing a different cardinal direction to catch the sun from dawn until dusk. Inside, a sophisticated water clock ticked away the hours when the sun was gone. This building served a bustling public square, allowing merchants and philosophers alike to track the time regardless of the weather. These structures transcended their practical function. They became landmarks, gathering places, and undeniable symbols of a civilization that believed it could measure, order, and ultimately master the world around it. But what was the ultimate limit of this mastery? Even the grandest sundial ever built shared a single, humbling weakness. Setting up a sundial was a ritual of profound alignment. A Roman engineer did not simply place a slab on the ground and hope for the best. He engaged in a meticulous process to marry the stone to the sky. The first and most critical step was finding true north. Without a magnetic compass, they used the stars themselves. On a clear night, they would locate the pole star, which sits almost directly above the Earth's North Pole. They would then suspend a weighted plumb line, a simple string with a heavy bob, and adjust it until it lined up perfectly with that fixed point in the heavens. This vertical line gave them their immutable north-south meridian, the foundational axis for the entire dial. With this celestial reference secured, they could position the sundial's base. Using water levels, simple troughs filled with water that provided a perfectly flat plane, the builders would carefully level the stone dial plate. A surface tilted even slightly would distort the shadow's path, making the hours run fast or slow. Once the plate was perfectly flat and oriented to the north-south line, the final act was to set the gnomon. This central spike had to be angled with extraordinary precision. Its tilt was not arbitrary. It was set to match the exact latitude of the city. For Rome, this meant the gnomon rose from the dial at an angle of 42 degrees from the horizontal. A carpenter's square and a simple graduated scale could achieve this, locking the stone finger into its perpetual lean toward the pole star. The final test was one of patience. At the exact moment of local solar noon, when the sun reached its highest point in the sky, the engineer would watch the dial's shadow. If everything was aligned perfectly, the shadow would fall directly on the noon line. If it missed by even a finger's width, the entire dial would be adjusted, a painstaking correction to ensure the city's clock was born in perfect sync with the sun. This was not a one-time setup. It was a calibration, a conversation between human intellect and cosmic motion. But what happened when this perfectly calibrated machine met the messy, unpredictable reality of the calendar year? The secret to carving time onto stone lay in a branch of mathematics we still use today, geometry. To lay out the hour lines on a dial face, Roman engineers acted as celestial cartographers, translating the sun's arc across the sky into fixed, precise angles on a flat or curved surface. The entire system hinged on two unchangeable facts: the local latitude and the Earth's axial tilt. The first step was always setting the gnomon, that central pointer. Its angle was not a guess. It was a direct reflection of your position on the globe. If you were in Rome, at 42 degrees north latitude, the gnomon had to lean back at exactly 42 degrees from the horizontal plane of the dial. This critical alignment ensured the pointer was parallel to the Earth's own axis, pointing toward the celestial pole, which is why the process of finding true north was so essential. Once this stone finger was locked into its permanent slant, the real work of mapping the hours could begin. The path of the sun's shadow throughout the day traces a complex curve, but the Romans knew how to break it down into a series of straight lines. For a horizontal sundial, the most common type, they used a method involving trigonometry or its geometric equivalents. Imagine the gnomon's tip as the apex of a series of right-angled triangles. The length of the shadow is one side, the height of the gnomon is another, and the angle of the sun above the horizon completes the triangle. The key was solving for the angle of the shadow at each specific hour. This angle, measured from the base of the gnomon along the north-south line, is what defines each hour line. For example, the line for 9 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon might be calculated at an angle of, say, 30 degrees from the noon line. The calculations for the hours closer to sunrise and sunset became progressively more complex, requiring a deep understanding of spherical geometry. How did they perform these calculations without modern calculators? They relied on pre-computed trigonometric tables, often inherited from Greek astronomers like Hipparchus, or they used intricate geometric constructions with compasses and straightedges to physically plot the angles on the stone before carving. Think of it as an ancient analog version of a navigation app on your phone. Your phone uses GPS satellites and complex algorithms to pinpoint your location and time. The Roman engineer used a known latitude, a set of mathematical tables, and simple tools to achieve the same goal, anchoring a specific place to the cosmic clock. This was the invisible intellect behind the beautiful stone, a grid of calculated lines that turned a shadow's casual drift into a measured, reliable march. The shadow on the public sundial dictated the rhythm of an entire city. From the moment its silhouette touched the first morning hour, Rome began to stir. The baths, for instance, did not open at a fixed time, but at a specific hour indicated by the sun. An inscription from Pompeii explicitly states that the baths were to open at the first hour of the afternoon and close at the eighth, a schedule entirely dependent on the moving shadow. This meant that in the deep of winter, the public bathing period was remarkably short, while in the long days of summer it stretched for hours. The markets, too, operated on this solar clock. Merchants would set up their stalls at dawn and pack them away when the shadow reached the line marking the market's official closing hour, a system that required everyone to read the same public timepiece. Even the courts were ruled by the sun's passage. The famed lawyer and philosopher Pliny the Younger wrote about the anxiety of watching the water clock during a trial, knowing his speaking time was limited. While water clocks measured the actual length of speeches, the sundial governed the court's overall schedule, determining when sessions began and adjourned. We have surviving graffiti from Pompeii that reads, "I hate the sundial, for it tells me I must go to dinner when I am not yet hungry." This simple complaint reveals how deeply this technology penetrated daily life, imposing a social order that sometimes chafed against personal desire. Religious ceremonies were particularly tied to this celestial timing. A sacrifice had to be performed at the exact solar noon to be considered auspicious, requiring a priest to carefully watch the dial in the forum. The entire civilization, from its commerce to its courts to its communion with the gods, moved to the silent, steady beat of a stone-cast shadow. The Romans did not invent the sundial from nothing. They perfected an idea born centuries earlier. The earliest known sundials came from the Greeks, simple hemispherical bowls called scaphs. These were profound innovations, yet they were often crude and location-specific, lacking the mathematical rigor the Romans would later apply. A Greek scaph might tell the time adequately in the city it was built for, but it was not a tool for a mobile empire. The key turning point was the Roman adoption of trigonometry from Hellenistic astronomers. This mathematical leap transformed the craft. Instead of copying a design or using rough approximations, Roman engineers could calculate the precise angles for the hour lines for any given latitude. This is what allowed them to create both the massive, hyper-accurate public monuments and the sophisticated, adjustable portable dials. The very portability of these devices marks a dramatic evolution. A Roman traveling sundial was a marvel of miniaturization and complexity, often made of finely wrought bronze with multiple hinged components and intricately engraved maps of different provinces. It was not just a timekeeper, it was a status symbol and a testament to imperial reach, allowing a citizen to carry a piece of Roman order to the farthest frontiers. The decorative elements evolved alongside the engineering. Early Greek dials were often purely functional. Roman dials, by contrast, were frequently adorned with mythological scenes, dedications to emperors, and intricate geometric patterns. They turned a scientific instrument into a work of art, a constant reminder that measuring time was a divine and civilized pursuit. When the Western Roman Empire faded, the knowledge of their sundials did not vanish. Islamic scholars and engineers preserved and advanced these designs, refining the geometry and creating even more complex universal dials that could be used across wider regions. These improved models eventually made their way back into Europe during the Middle Ages, forming the direct technical foundation for the breathtaking astronomical clocks of the Renaissance. The silent stone finger pointing to the hours in a medieval cathedral square was, in essence, the direct descendant of the gnomon in the Roman Forum. This unbroken chain of innovation, from a simple Greek bowl to a world-spanning timekeeping system, set humanity on a path that would ultimately lead to the mechanical clock and our own modern obsession with perfect, uniform time. We often picture Roman timekeeping through our own modern lens, creating a few persistent myths. One of the biggest is the belief that the Romans tracked minutes and seconds as we do. Their world ran on the scale of the hour, a unit that, as we have seen, was elastic and changed with the seasons. The concept of a minute, a 60th of an hour, was a known mathematical idea discussed by astronomers and engineers, but it had no practical application in daily Roman life. There was no need to tell a centurion to report in 15 minutes, or for a merchant to time a transaction to the second. The pace of existence was governed by the broader strokes of the sundial's shadow, not the frantic tick of a tiny hand. This reveals a fundamentally different relationship with time, one that was more integrated with the natural world and less obsessed with micromanagement. Another common misconception is that sundials were luxury items, reserved for the elite in their private villas. The archaeological record tells a very different story. While the wealthy certainly had beautiful private dials, the most important sundials were public property. Excavations at sites like Pompeii and Oster reveal these timekeeping stones positioned at major street intersections, in market squares, and near public baths. They were as fundamental to city infrastructure as the aqueducts or the paved roads. An ordinary baker, a legionary on leave, or a dockworker unloading a ship would all glance up at the same public dial to know when to meet a friend, when to break for a meal, or when their shift was meant to end. Inscriptions on some of these public dials even name the local magistrate or wealthy citizen who donated it to the community, a common form of civic patronage. This was not a technology that separated the classes. It was one that unified them under a shared, visible schedule. The rhythm it imposed was the same for the senator and the shoemaker, its shadow falling equally on all. This precise measurement of the day reshaped the very mechanics of the empire. For the Roman military, the sundial was not merely a convenience, it was a strategic weapon. Legions on campaign synchronized their movements using portable dials, coordinating the advance of multiple columns to converge on an enemy position at a precise solar hour. A dawn assault required every soldier to understand when the first light would break, a time that changed daily. This shared solar time enabled complex maneuvers and surprise attacks that would have been impossible for a disorganized foe. In the world of commerce, the impact was just as profound. Contracts for shipping were often tied to the sundial's hours, with penalties for merchants whose ships arrived after a specified time on a specific day. This created the first reliable schedules for trade across the Mediterranean, fueling an economic boom by reducing uncertainty and allowing capital to flow more predictably. Even agriculture operated on this solar clock, with the most favorable hours for planting, irrigating, and harvesting dictated by the sun's position. Knowledge passed down through generations, but now made visible and communal by the public dial in the nearest town. This new punctuality forged a cultural expectation of reliability. To be late was to show disrespect for the shared order, a social sin that could damage one's reputation in business or politics. Yet this very regimentation sparked a philosophical backlash. The Stoic philosopher Seneca observed this new busyness with deep skepticism. He wrote of people who, despite being surrounded by countless sundials and water clocks, still found themselves with no time, rushing from appointment to appointment, slaves to the very devices meant to give them mastery over their days. He lamented that life was not living but merely being busy, a poignant critique from an era first learning the pressures of the clock. The sundial, therefore, stood at a crossroads. It was a tool that brought immense practical power, enabling military victories and economic prosperity. But it also introduced a new anxiety, a feeling that time was something to be managed, divided, and ultimately wasted. The civilization had harnessed the sun, but in doing so, had it begun to lose its rhythm with the natural world. Roman engineering did not emerge in a vacuum, but stood on the shoulders of earlier timekeeping giants. The Egyptians, for instance, used simple shadow clocks as far back as 1500 BC. These were often flat stone bars with a T-shaped crosspiece that cast a shadow across a scale of marks. While effective for dividing the daylight, they were far less precise than the curved Roman dials and lacked the sophisticated celestial geometry that accounted for the changing seasons. The Babylonians, master astronomers, developed complex mathematical models of the sky, yet their sundials were often simple hemispherical bowls, similar to early Greek designs, focused more on astronomical observation than on regulating daily public life. In China, independent innovations led to the development of the equatorial sundial. This brilliant design aligned its dial plate parallel to the celestial equator, making its hour lines perfectly evenly spaced. This was a more elegant mathematical solution in some ways, but these Chinese dials were primarily used by court astronomers and scholars, deeply integrated with their cosmological systems rather than being a tool for the common citizen. The Romans took these scattered principles and standardized them on an imperial scale. They absorbed the Greek geometry, recognized the need for portability, and then industrialized the concept, producing thousands of durable, public sundials from Britain to Syria. Their true innovation was not the invention of the sundial, but its democratization. They transformed an astronomical instrument into the heartbeat of civic life, embedding it into the legal, commercial, and social fabric of an entire empire in a way no civilization had done before. This was the Roman genius, taking a good idea and building an entire world around it. The silent, ash-covered streets of Pompeii offer a frozen moment in time, and among the ruins, we find their sundials still standing. One particularly well-preserved example was discovered near the city's Stabian Baths. Its marble face scarred, but its hour lines still sharply defined. This dial was not a decorative object. It was a working tool for a bustling public space, its placement confirming that everyone from bathers to shopkeepers relied on its shadow. The inscription on its base does not name an emperor, but a local official, a man named Marcus Novius, who donated it to his community. This was timekeeping as a civic duty, a gift to the people. Even more telling are the small, subtle scratches found around the gnommon's base on some recovered dials. These are not damage, they are evidence of recalibration. Over decades, a sundial could settle slightly, throwing its readings off by a few minutes. These scratch marks show where a Roman engineer painstakingly adjusted the gnommon's angle, using simple tools to restore its perfect alignment with the pole star. They were not content with approximate time. They actively maintained their cosmic link. Far from the Mediterranean sun, in the damp frontier province of Britannia, a different story is told by the artifacts. A portable bronze sundial was unearthed at the Roman fort of Vindolanda, a place famous for its preserved wooden writing tablets. This intricate device, small enough to hold in your hand, was designed for a commanding officer who needed to coordinate patrols and guard changes in a land often shrouded in fog. Its craftsmanship is distinctly Roman, but its very presence so far north speaks to a necessary adaptation. A legionary from Italy could not rely on his homeland's sense of time. He needed a tool that could be adjusted for the drastically different latitude and the longer summer days of Britain. This portable dial was more than a timepiece. It was a piece of portable Roman order, a tiny engine of administration that helped a distant outpost run on empire time. Perhaps the most profound archaeological insight comes not from a perfect dial, but from a flawed one. A sundial excavated near Naples shows a clear, uncorrected error in its layout. The hour lines for the early morning and late afternoon are slightly miscalculated, a mistake that would have grown more pronounced as the seasons changed. This imperfect object is arguably more valuable than a flawless masterpiece. It tells us that not every artisan was a master geometer, that the knowledge of trigonometry was not universally perfect. It reveals the human element behind the engineering, the possibility of a miscalculation or a rushed commission. Yet the citizens of that town likely used it for generations, their daily rhythms shaped by its consistent, if slightly inaccurate, shadow. Archaeology thus gives us the full picture, confirming the historical accounts of sophisticated public timekeeping, while also revealing the practical realities, the local pride, and the occasional human error etched in stone. These silent stones are not just relics. They are time capsules containing the very pulse of Roman life. That silent stone finger pointing at the sky was guided by the most brilliant minds of the age. Roman astronomy was not an abstract science. It was the essential foundation for every public clock in the empire. Astronomers like Claudius Ptolemy, working in the Great Library of Alexandria, compiled vast star catalogs and refined geometric models of the solar system. His work, the Almagest, became the definitive astronomical textbook for centuries, providing the mathematical backbone that allowed engineers to calculate the precise angles for sundials with unprecedented accuracy. But this knowledge was not locked away in scrolls. It was applied directly to the stone dials in the Forum. The most critical annual events for checking a sundial's truth were the equinoxes and solstices. How could they possibly pinpoint these fleeting moments without modern instruments? They used a meridian line, a simple groove carved into a long, level stone surface, running perfectly north-south. At local solar noon on the day of an equinox, when the sun crosses the celestial equator, it stands directly above the equator. A carefully placed vertical gnomon would cast a shadow that fell exactly along this north-south meridian line. If the shadow strayed east or west of the line, the engineers knew their dial was out of alignment and needed correction. The solstices provided another crucial check. At noon on the summer solstice, the sun reaches its highest possible point in the sky, casting the year's shortest noon shadow. On the winter solstice, it is at its lowest, creating the longest noon shadow. By marking these extreme shadow points on their dials each year, Roman keepers of time could verify that their instrument was still tracking perfectly with the cosmos. This was an ongoing, living calibration. A public sundial was not a set-it and forget-it device. It required annual verification by priests or civic officials who understood the stars. The Grand Solarium Augusti, for example, almost certainly had its massive bronze grid adjusted over the decades as the ground settled. This intimate link between the theoretical work of a genius like Ptolemy and the daily life of a Roman citizen shopping in the market is a testament to their world. The most advanced science of the era was not hidden in a lab. It was carved in marble for all to see, a public promise that human order could indeed mirror the heavens. A Roman legionary stationed in Britannia would have found the grand sundials of Rome utterly useless. Under the province's perpetual gray skies, the stone dial's shadow vanished for days on end, leaving the fort in a state of temporal drift. This was the sundial's ultimate vulnerability, its absolute dependence on a clear sky. Across the empire, the effectiveness of this technology was dictated entirely by local weather. In sun-drenched Egypt, a public sundial was reliable nearly every single day of the year, its shadow a crisp, unwavering guide. But in northern outposts like Britannia or Germania, where clouds were the norm, a fixed sundial was more a monument to Roman ambition than a practical tool. So how did they cope? They adapted their methods to the environment. In these cloudier regions, the portable, adjustable sundial became even more crucial. A centurion would learn to seize any brief break in the clouds, quickly orienting his small bronze dial the moment the sun appeared to get a rough fix on the hour before the light faded again. For prolonged periods of gloom, they fell back on the clepsydra. A water clock was standard equipment in a frontier fort's headquarters, its steady drip providing a continuous, if imperfect, measure of time that was immune to the weather outside. This created a two-tiered system of timekeeping, a solar ideal for the Mediterranean heartland, and a more fluid, water-based reality for the cloudier frontiers. Some engineers may have even designed sundials specifically for less sunny climates. A conjectural but plausible design could have featured a much larger, more reflective dial face to better catch the weak, diffused light of a northern sky, making the faint shadow easier to read. This environmental dependency reveals a hard truth. Even the most brilliant engineering could be humbled by a simple bank of clouds, forcing the world's most powerful empire to tell time in the dark. The same marble that told the hour could also tell a story. Beyond their scientific function, Roman sundials were canvases for art and powerful declarations of social status. A wealthy patrician commissioning a dial for his villa courtyard did not want a plain stone slab, he wanted a masterpiece. Artisans transformed these timepieces into intricate sculptures, carving the dial face with scenes from mythology. You might find Apollo, the sun god himself, driving his chariot across the stone, his journey mirroring the sun's actual path through the sky. Or the dial might feature images of the seasons, their figures framing the hour lines in a perpetual dance of the year. These carvings were not random decorations. They were deeply symbolic, linking the measurement of time to the divine forces that govern the universe. The materials themselves shouted wealth. A dial made from flawless white marble from Carrara, or the rare imperial purple porphyry from Egypt, was as much about displaying power as it was about telling time. The base of a public sundial often bore a formal inscription, dedicating the timepiece to the emperor or to the gods in thanks for a military victory, forever linking the donor's name to the civic order. But perhaps the most personal touches were the poetical mottos. Many sundials bore short, poignant verses that reflected on the very nature of time they measured. One common inscription read, "I count only the sunny hours." This was more than a clever pun. It was a philosophical statement, a reminder to focus on the bright and productive moments of life. Another motto stated, "It is later than you think," a sobering nudge for the passerby to use their time wisely. These mottos transformed the sundial from a mere instrument into a source of reflection, a stone sage offering daily wisdom with the moving shadow. For the Roman elite, a beautifully crafted sundial was the ultimate symbol of paideia, that ideal combination of wealth, education, and refined taste. It showed you were rich enough to afford such a work, educated enough to understand its complex geometry, and wise enough to contemplate the fleeting hours it marked. In their hands, a tool of science became a meditation on life itself. Even the most perfectly engineered sundial was not a perfect clock. The best Roman timekeepers, carved by master artisans and aligned with celestial precision, still operated within a margin of error. Under ideal conditions, a well-made public sundial could reliably tell the time to within about 10 or 15 minutes of true solar time. This was remarkably accurate for the ancient world, perfectly adequate for scheduling a Senate session or opening the markets. But several persistent factors conspired to introduce small, cumulative errors into this seemingly perfect system. The thickness of the gnomon itself was a primary source of inaccuracy. That stone or bronze finger was not a razor-thin line, it had a measurable width. On a dial face carved with fine, sharp lines, the shadow it cast had a blurred, fuzzy edge. Was the true time indicated by the leading edge of the shadow, its center, or its trailing edge? This ambiguity could easily create a discrepancy of several minutes, a problem that grew more pronounced as the sun moved lower in the sky and the shadows stretched and softened. Then there was the material itself. A massive marble dial, exposed to centuries of sun, rain, and frost, could warp or settle almost imperceptibly. A tilt of just a single degree in the dial plate, invisible to the naked eye, would be enough to throw the shadow off its mark by a noticeable amount. The gnomon could also loosen in its socket over decades, leaning slightly away from its perfect polar alignment. But perhaps the most fascinating and unavoidable source of error was not in the stone, but in the sky itself. The air we breathe acts like a lens, bending the sun's light as it passes through our atmosphere. This phenomenon, called atmospheric refraction, means we see the sun slightly higher in the sky than its true geometric position. The effect is most dramatic at sunrise and sunset, when the sun appears to be above the horizon while it is actually still below it. But even at noon, refraction subtly lifts the sun's apparent place in the sky. The result, a sundial's shadow is always slightly displaced from where pure geometry says it should be. The Romans may not have fully understood the physics of refraction, but they would have observed its consequence, a consistent, slight error baked into the very physics of their timekeeping. So while the public trusted the shadow on the marble, the engineers knew their masterpiece was in a constant, delicate negotiation with an imperfect world. The limitations of the public sundial did not stifle Roman ingenuity, they ignited it. This drive for precision and portability led to an explosion of specialized designs that pushed engineering into the realm of art. One of the most personal was the ring sundial, a portable timekeeper you could literally carry in your pocket. Imagine a small bronze ring, sized to fit on your finger or hang from a chain. A tiny hole was drilled through one side, allowing a needle-thin beam of sunlight to pass through and strike hour lines engraved on the inside of the band. To use it, you would simply hold the ring up, turning it until that brilliant pinprick of light fell directly on the correct line for the month and day. It was an intimate, almost magical interaction with the sun, a personal clock that required no shadow at all. For more complex needs, there were diptych sundials, crafted from two small hinged wooden or ivory plates that opened like a book. One leaf held a string gnomon, while the other contained a network of engraved lines for different months. These were the sophisticated predecessors of the modern pocket watch, allowing a traveler to adjust the device for the changing seasons. But the most ambitious designs looked beyond telling the hour of the day. Consider the spherical sundial, a marvel of geometry where the entire dial face was a perfect stone sphere. The hour lines curved around it in 3 dimensions, and a central gnomon cast a shadow that tracked time with stunning accuracy across its curved surface. This was not just a tool, It was a physical model of the celestial sphere itself, a miniature universe you could hold in your hands. Farmers relied on simpler but equally clever seasonal dials. These were not marked with the 12 hours of the day, but with broader periods crucial for agriculture, such as the optimal weeks for planting wheat or pruning vines. Their gnomons were often designed to cast a shadow that would only reach a certain mark when the sun achieved the necessary height in the sky for that specific task. Each of these variants solved a unique problem, proving that Roman timekeeping was not a monolithic science, but a flexible and deeply creative discipline. How far could this innovation go? Could a sundial point not just to the hour, but to the very direction of home? The Romans never once debated shifting their hours forward or back. The very concept would have seemed absurd to them, a futile attempt to outsmart the sun itself. Their entire system was built on true local solar time, where noon was always the moment the sun reached its highest point directly above you. This meant that if you traveled from Rome to Naples, a journey of just over 100 miles, your sundial would show a time difference of roughly 5 minutes. Imagine the logistical headache for a central administration trying to coordinate tax collection or military dispatches across an empire that stretched from Scotland to Syria. A legion marching eastward would experience sunrise slightly earlier each day, their official schedule constantly drifting ahead of the time back in the capital. There was no empire-wide time zone, only a continuous, unbroken gradient of local sun time. This inherent fluidity forced a remarkable degree of local autonomy and acceptance. A merchant in Gaul did not expect his business hours to align perfectly with those of a counterpart in Egypt. They both simply operated according to the sun in their own sky. Their world was a tapestry of thousands of microtimes, all woven together by the single, unwavering thread of the solar day. So while we today wrestle with the artificial tyranny of the clock twice a year, resetting our devices and our sleep schedules, the Romans lived in a rhythm that was, paradoxically, both more variable and more natural. Their time was not something to be saved or manipulated, but something to be observed and obeyed, a constant reminder that even the mightiest empire was still subject to the ancient laws of the heavens. That same geometry etched into Roman marble now guides modern sundial makers who blend ancient principles with laser precision. While we live in a world of digital clocks, the art of the sundial has never truly vanished. Enthusiasts and scholars still construct them using the very same trigonometric tables the Romans relied upon, proving the timelessness of their celestial math. Contemporary artists often draw direct inspiration from Roman designs, creating public installations that are both functional sculptures and homages to that ancient craft. You might find a modern analmatic sundial in a city park, where the visitor stands on a specific date marker to become the living gnomon, a direct echo of the personal interaction Romans had with their portable ring dials. Archaeologists, too, use sundials as critical historical documents. By analyzing the layout of a recovered dial face, they can often pinpoint the exact latitude for which it was designed, sometimes even tracing its origin to a specific quarry or workshop. This turns a broken piece of stone into a map of ancient trade routes and technological exchange. The study of these objects sits at the crossroads of science, art, and history, revealing not just how the Romans told time, but how they saw their place in a vast, orderly cosmos. Their legacy is not merely in the stone they left behind, but in the enduring human desire to mark our days by the oldest clock we know. You can build a working piece of Roman timekeeping right in your own backyard. The core of your design is the gnomon, the sundial's pointer, which you can fashion from a simple wooden dowel or even a straight, sturdy stick. The first and most critical step is finding your true north. Forget about a magnetic compass, because magnetic north and true north are not the same. Instead, wait for a clear night and locate the North Star Polaris. Hammer a tall stake into the ground, and over the course of the evening, watch the shadow it casts. The shortest shadow it makes will point directly to geographic north. Mark that line on the ground with a string or a second stick. This is your permanent north-south meridian line, the foundation of your entire project. Now, for the dial plate, you do not need imported marble. A flat piece of wood, a smooth patio stone, or even a circle of sturdy cardboard will work perfectly. Secure your gnomon to the center of this plate, but do not just glue it on straight up. This is where you apply the Roman genius for latitude. If you live, for example, near Chicago at about 42 degrees north, you must tilt your gnomon so it leans back at a 42-degree angle from the horizontal dial plate. You can measure this with a simple protractor. This specific lean ensures your pointer is parallel to the Earth's axis, aiming toward the celestial pole, just like the grand dials in the Roman Forum. With your gnomon fixed at its proper angle and your dial plate positioned so its north-south line matches the one you marked on the ground, your basic sundial is ready for its most exciting phase, the calibration. You will not carve hour lines just yet. Instead, on a sunny day, mark where the tip of the shadow falls on the dial plate at the top of each hour, using a modern clock for reference. Start at 9 in the morning and make a small, precise mark every hour until 3 in the afternoon. You will notice these marks do not form a straight line, but a gentle curve. This curve is the visible proof of the sun's changing path, the same celestial geometry Roman engineers translated into stone. Once you have your marks, you can connect them with a permanent line for each hour. Label them with Roman numerals if you want an authentic touch. Your homemade sundial will now tell local solar time, just as it did 2,000 years ago. The shadow moving across your own hand-drawn lines connects you directly to the legionaries, merchants, and citizens who once lived by this same silent rhythm. What will your personal stone tell you about the passage of your own day? Roman sundials stand as a monumental achievement in engineering, a perfect marriage of celestial observation and stone. They achieved remarkable accuracy by modeling the cosmos itself, aligning a slanted gnomon with the Earth's axis and carving custom hour lines for a specific latitude. Yet they were forever bound by the sun's whims, their elegant shadows vanishing under clouds and their hours stretching and shrinking with the seasons. These were not flawless instruments, but they were brilliant ones, shaping the pulse of an empire by synchronizing commerce, law, and daily life with the rhythm of the heavens. They remind us that time was once a visible, shared experience, a shadow sweeping across a public square. So the next time you glance at the clock on your phone, think of that ancient stone finger pointing skyward. Have you encountered a sundial that made you pause? Share your own stories of ancient technology in the comments below, or better yet, seek out a local museum to stand before one of these silent timekeepers yourself, and for a moment, feel the weight of 2,000 years in its shadow.